Thank you for joining us for our latest and the greatest of Tableau series. This one is focused on storytelling with data visualization and will be presented by our very own Tableau Zen Master, Joshua Milligan. Teknion itself is a Tableau Gold Partner, as well as the winner of the Partner of the Year for Training and Services. So we'll quickly jump over to Joshua, who is not only a fantastic Tableau data storyteller, but also an artist, game developer, and author. All of these things within Tableau. I'm going to quickly turn it over to him and let him introduce himself a little bit more formally. Thank you, guys.
All right, well, thank you, Bridget, and thanks for that great introduction. Today I am going to talk about storytelling with data visualization, and I'm excited to share that with you. I'll start with a little bit about myself. Most of you know me, and Bridget already introduced me, so I won't spend long. But I am Joshua Milligan, and I am a principal consultant at Teknion Data Solutions, which means that I am working with clients day in and day out to look at their data, visualize it, analyze it, and answer questions that they have so that they can make key decisions. That means I'm spending most of my days working with Tableau, which is a lot of fun. I am a Tableau Zen Master, which is an incredible honor to be named that by Tableau. And what that means is that in addition to understanding Tableau at a deep level and how it works and how to use it, I also enjoy helping people with it. So helping not only clients in my day job, but helping people in the community even after hours, and just helping them to understand what they can do with Tableau and how they can use it to see and understand their data. I am the author of Learning Tableau, which is now in its second edition, and that was an experience to write that book. In fact, we did an entire webinar about the journey of writing a Tableau book. If you're interested, check that out, and it was a lot of fun, but I learned a lot in the process. And many of you also know that I like Star Trek, Star Wars, Stargate, Battlestar Galactica, pretty much anything that has the word star in the title. Of course, that gives me a certain title as well. And you may often see references to some of these things in these webinars. Now, you might be asking yourself, what story are you going to experience today? There's lots of different stories that I could tell about data visualization. And in fact, the stories that I often tell have to do with what I often do in Tableau. And that is, I often am exploring the data. So a lot of my time is spent looking at the data, trying to understand it, trying to see if I can find trends or correlations, trying to see exactly what's going on in that data. So I might be looking at things like what relationship is there between sales and profit based on certain categories in the data, or even subcategories of the data. And I might be looking at some statistical analysis. I might be looking for outliers. All kinds of things as I explore the data to try to understand what story or stories there are in the data. I might be looking for trends, so what's going on over time. So as we look at profit and we look at how people have ordered over time, what sort of trends or maybe even forecasts can I find in the data? That's always a nice looking trend when you look at profit. And I might be doing spatial analysis to see where things are happening, to see if there's any correlation of what's going on and where it's happening. So maybe we'll take a look at profit by state. And this is a lot of the time that I spend with clients is trying to understand their data, trying to look at it, analyze it, see what's going on. And you know, and maybe even before that, I have to prepare the data and maybe integrate various sources. But ultimately, what I often give clients is something like this, a dashboard that I build. And a lot of times, what it ends up looking like is something that they can use as an analytical tool so that they can look at their data over time and begin to understand what's going on in their data as it changes month to month, year to year, or even day by day. And so I'm building out a dashboard that gives them the ability to do that so that they can better understand what's going on. And ultimately, they may have something like this, a nice tool that they can use to start to see how things looked over time, how they can look at things, and I'm giving them something that they can use to maybe further explore the data and understand it for themselves. Now, this is incredibly useful, and clients love it when they can see their data, and not only that, when they have a tool that going forward they can see things as they change and see what's going on, and they can explore it for themselves. But this data exploration and this this analytical tool, it's incredibly useful, but it only does part of what's really needed, or what's often needed. And so it's only one of many stories that we could tell. So the story I'm going to tell today is not the story of data preparation or integration or data exploration or even the analysis that we often do. What I'm going to share today is a story of how, after we've done all of that, do we take the data and the stories that we've found in the data, and how do we turn that into a presentation, into a visualization that actually tells that specific story? Now, you could do this with dashboards, and everything that I'm going to share is going to be applicable to that, but I'm going to primarily focus today on just a single visualization. How can we tell a story that is compelling and that demands action? How do we create a visualization that does that? How do we tell stories with our data? Well, one thing that we've got to start with is just understanding what a story is. Now, before I share what a story is, I do have a quick poll for you guys. So, what I'd like to know, I warned you, I do like Star Wars. What is your favorite Star Wars movie? We'll take about 15 to 30 seconds here. Alright, so here are the results. Looks like most of you actually enjoyed the original the best, followed by The Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi. Now you may wonder why none of the prequels showed up. Well, several reasons, but the one that I'll stick with today is that there were only this many options available for a poll. Now, despite the fact that you liked Star Wars even better than The Empire Strikes Back, that's what we're going to look at today. So what is a story? Well, there are many different aspects of a story that you might think of. You might think of plot or rising action or falling action, all those things that you might have learned in school. And so what I've done is I've taken what I could remember from school and come up with my own diagram of a story. Every story starts out with an introduction, and then there's a crisis of some kind, maybe multiple crises, some sort of a conflict that's going to drive the action forward, and then you're going to have a turning point, a place in the story. It's a hinge. If you go one direction, the story turns out very differently than if you go in another direction. It might be a choice that the main character faces, or it might be an action over which they have no control. And so that's the turning point, which very quickly drives the story to a climax, where the action hits its highest point, and then you have some falling action that leads to a conclusion. So let's think about how this works with The Empire Strikes Back. Every Star Wars movie has an introduction. Most of them have the famous crawl. And so that gives you a little bit of background about the characters and the setting and sets up the action. And then you're going to have a little bit of introduction to the characters itself. In The Empire Strikes Back, we don't need much of an introduction to the characters. We've already met them in a previous movie. So the introduction is fairly short. And then you're going to have a crisis or a conflict or a series of crises that's going to propel the narrative forward, and it's going to maybe develop the characters a little bit, but it's all leading up to a turning point. And the reason why I chose The Empire Strikes Back, even over Star Wars, which most of you liked, is because I think The Empire Strikes Back has one of the most compelling turning points of any story that I can think of. Because at a key moment in the story, Luke Skywalker, our hero, faces a choice. Is he going to continue and complete his training as a Jedi, or is he going to rush off and face Darth Vader and potentially fall to the dark side? It's a choice that even Yoda says will determine his destiny and his fate, and potentially the fate of the entire galaxy. And it's going to change the story completely based on which way he goes. That very quickly leads to the climax, one of the most epic climaxes in all of cinema history, and one of the greatest reveals of all time. I won't spoil it for you if you haven't seen it. And of course, that's going to lead to a conclusion. Now, every story has a conclusion, but it can be quite different based on the story. So some stories have a very happy ending. Everybody lives happily ever after. Some stories have a sad conclusion. Everybody dies. Some stories, the conclusion is just, we live to fight another day, and you know that there's going to be additional stories to come. But there's always a conclusion to a story. So that's the basic outline of a story. And that's great when it comes to Star Wars, but how does that relate to data visualization? What does a story look like with data visualization? Well, it turns out it looks exactly the same. We have the same exact components: intro, crisis, turning point, climax, conclusion, but we can kind of simplify it. So I'm going to have just three simple categories. One is context. That's the introduction to the story, and we'll talk about that. The second is narrative. What is the story? What's the conflict in the story? What drives the story? We'll talk about that as well. And then finally, a call to action. What is the climax and the conclusion of the story? Let's take a look at how this works, and we'll start with context. Context, I'm going to break that down into a couple different things to think about. One is the context for you. And that is a couple of major things. Who is your audience, and what is your delivery? So when you think of the context of audience, you need to understand your audience. You need to know their needs, their desires, their fears, their motivations, because you're going to craft a story that meets their needs, that speaks to their desires and their motivations. You also need to know what kind of expertise do they have? How familiar are they with the data? How familiar are they with the subject area that you're going to be telling the story about? What's their relationship to the data? Do they understand it well? Do they trust it? Do you need to validate it for them? What's their relationship to decisions? Are they the decision maker? Do they have influence with the decision makers? Are they even going to be able to make a decision? And what's their relationship to you? Do they know who you are? Do they trust you? Does it matter that they know who you are? And then you need to think about your delivery. What's your mode of delivery? Is this going to be something that you're going to show on a screen? Is it something that they're going to look at on their mobile device? Something that you're going to print out? Something that you're going to show on a projector or deliver over a webinar? And some of that is going to determine what level of detail you need, because there's a lot that you can tell if you're presenting this before an audience that you wouldn't necessarily be able to expect them to know if you just hand them a chart. So if you're giving it to them as a Tableau workbook or as something that they're going to look at on Tableau server, you need to maybe include some additional detail so that they can understand what conclusions you're driving them to. But this is the context that we'll focus on mostly, is not the context for you, but the context for your audience. So as you begin to craft your story and you're going to introduce them to the story, what kinds of context do you need to give to them? So take a simple chart like this. This chart gives context. You can see it in the title. I know that I'm looking at 2016. I know that I'm talking about profit. I know that I'm looking at East and West regions. And then the chart itself reinforces this context. I can see profit on an axis. I see dollar signs, and we're looking at millions. So that's helping me establish some context. I can see dates across the bottom. I didn't label it with a year because hopefully the title has already established that context, but I may need to decide if that's important as well. This really is the bare minimum of context that I could get away with a chart like this. There's a lot more context that may be important depending on the audience. What company am I talking about? Am I talking about a subset of a company? Am I talking about all kinds of different things that you could think of in terms of context that may be important? Are these the only regions? Or do they need to understand that this is within the context of more regions? How large are these regions? All kinds of things that may be important, and that's where I'll have to know the audience and have to understand how much context they already have and how much I have to communicate in addition. So that's context. But in and of itself, this is not a story. You can look at this chart and you can start to tell yourself a story, but I haven't really told you a story with this chart. And so we move on to thinking about narrative. This is the second part of telling a story. What is the story that I want to tell? So here's the basic chart. 2016 profit for East and West regions. It's not really a story yet. I haven't really told you anything yet. But notice how it changes with just a little manipulation. Now I'm starting to tell a story. Notice that the title has changed. 2016, a decline of profit in the East region. So now I've told you the story is about a decline of profit in the East. And I've highlighted that for you using color. And I've de-emphasized the West region. I've kept it there for context, but I've de-emphasized it. And I've really highlighted the fact that I'm going to tell you a story about the East region. So this is starting to develop that narrative. There are several different things that I could do with this story, or several different ways I could tell it. I could really focus on the East region. Notice this chart. It's the exact same data, but I've changed the title. Profits plunge in the East region. And I've changed the chart. Now this should make you a little bit uncomfortable. It's the same exact chart. I haven't done anything to it except that I've removed the West region. And when I did that, that changed the scale of the axis. Here was the original scale, going up to about 11 million. It's the same line, but when I change it to only go up to about 3 million, now that decline in profit looks a lot sharper than it did before. Now we'll talk about some pitfalls and some dangers to avoid as you tell stories. What you will have to decide is what story you're telling and what context is needed, and you're going to have to be careful not to overemphasize or to exaggerate things as you tell the story. This may be a legitimate way of telling it, but you'll have to really consider what you're doing. Here's another story that I could tell. Instead of focusing on the East region, what if I tell a happy story? West region profit grows 10 times in 2016. It's the same chart, but a totally different story that I'm bringing to your attention. And so that's narrative. What are you going to focus on? What story are you going to tell? So I've given you context, I've given you narrative, but what I haven't done is I haven't really drawn any conclusions yet. If this was all I gave you, West region profit grows or East region profit declines, that doesn't really tell you what to do with it. It might tell you a little bit of a story, but I haven't led you to any conclusion. And that's what we're going to do with our call to action. So here's our basic chart again, profit in the East and West regions. It's got the context. I could give it a little bit of narrative, but I need to tell you what to do. What if I change it just a bit to look like this? Notice what I've done. I've given you a little bit more context, but it's more than just context. This really is a climax in the story. Because in August 2016, the West region implemented a new pricing model. And I'm leading you to a conclusion. The conclusion that I'm leading you to is that that may have been the reason that we saw a dramatic increase in profit. And I've introduced something up here, some additional text that helps drive you to a conclusion as well. Now, sometimes you're going to want to state the conclusion for your audience, and sometimes you may want to lead them gently, or the conclusion may be that you just need to think about this, or you need to evaluate this more. Here, I'm just saying, should the East also adopt the same pricing model? Maybe they would see the same results in their profit. Consider another call to action. Here, I've introduced an entirely new dimension in the context. I've introduced a new aspect of the data, and that's the average discounts that we're given. I'm still focusing on profits in the East and how they've gone down, but now I'm showing you that maybe there's a correlation between the discounts, and look at this. If discounts go over 40%, those are the times when I actually saw negative profit in the East region. And I'm helping you to see that as a climax, and I'm helping you to come to the conclusion that we've really got to review that discount policy. So that gets us through the intro, the narrative, and the call to action. What sorts of things can you use to enhance a story? So I mentioned before that a lot of times I'm building data visualizations, and I love Tableau because it's so iterative, and I can build out something and I can see things in the data. But I've got to be careful that I don't just take what stood out to me after I spent hours of analysis and assume that my audience is going to be able to understand the same thing. So take, for example, this visualization here. Which managers were the most effective in 2016? And I've got a visualization here, a nice bar chart by quarter that kind of shows me what's going on. And there are some things here that are helpful, but there are some things that are not. I mean, for one thing, having this much color and having to go back and forth between the color legend and the chart, it's not very easy to do. There are some things that really stand out to me. I mean, for one thing, nobody made much profit in the second quarter. And most everyone made profit in the fourth quarter, except for a couple of managers who made profit in the first and third quarters, which is kind of interesting. But I haven't really told a story here. I haven't really helped you to see what I'm hoping is the conclusion, which is which managers were most effective in 2016. So what can enhance a story? Well, one thing is just to simplify. Do I really need to show things by quarter? Or if my question is which managers were most effective in 2016, maybe I just show you the effectiveness overall. And here's the profit earned by the top 5 managers, and now I can pretty easily see the effectiveness of the managers. Except, maybe I don't really see it, because maybe I need some reference. Reference is related to context, because here I'm giving you some additional context that we had a goal of $5 million of profit, but just adding that as a reference point really starts to help you to see which managers were the most effective. What else can enhance this story? What about color? Notice how color can be used in storytelling. Oftentimes, when I'm doing data visualization, I'm using color to help me understand the data. So I'm encoding the data with different colors, maybe profit to give me an intensity level, maybe different colors for different regions, and all of that's very helpful as I analyze the data. But sometimes that use of color is not as effective when I go to tell a story, because I can use that color strategically to draw and focus your attention on aspects of the story instead of just aspects of the data. So here I have really emphasized that we had 2 managers who were effective in 2016. I've created a climax in the data with the color, and I've drawn a conclusion, or at least led you to a conclusion, by introducing just the simple aspect of color. What about text? So I've changed a little bit of the text here, the titles. Now instead of who was most effective, I've asked another question: who should lead global efforts in 2017? And I say only 2 managers met their 2016 profit goal, which helps you draw maybe a different conclusion. All aspects of text should be looked at and evaluated as you determine, are they useful in telling the story? Are the labels useful? Do they add to the story? So I've labeled the profit here. Does that really help? Probably. Or maybe I could have used an axis. Should I label the axis? Should I give that information in the title? What labels do I give to reference lines? What annotations do I use? Text can really change how the story is told. So after you think about how to enhance a story, we have to think about dangers, because a story is powerful. A story can raise emotion in people. It can provoke thought, and it can evoke emotion, and it can bring about change, but all of that can be misused just as likely as it can be used. A story is powerful, but power is not necessarily a good thing in and of itself. So first of all, avoid missing, or even worse, hiding important context. Here's our chart again of West Region and how the profit grew over 10 times in 2016. What a compelling story, until you find out that we had a reorganization in October which combined the Southwest and Central regions into the West region. So of course profit jumped, because we're combining other profit from other regions in that month. And if I missed that, then I haven't done my job, and if I hid that, then I've done even worse. I've misled my audience intentionally, all because I left out some important context. So don't mislead your audience as you tell your story. Make sure they know the things that are important, and don't assume things that you may not know. Related to that, avoid misleading visualizations. So here's a compelling story. East Region management should be fired. Well, obviously, I mean, look at the profit difference between the West and the East. Except, notice what I've done to the axis. It goes in increments of 5 million, but it started not at 0, but somewhere maybe around 163 million. And so that totally misleads. Here's a much more accurate representation. Make sure you don't use misleading visualizations, because you can tell a compelling story that is completely wrong. How about this one? We've always met our sales quota. I look at our sales by month, and I love this this visualization. It has some reference. It has some context. I know what our sales quota was. I see that we've started our axis at 0, so no problem there. Going up by increments of $10,000 of sales. So I don't see any issues with this visualization. Nevertheless, it's still misleading, because if I simply change it from a line chart to a bar chart, I see that there are actually months with no sales. So have we always met our sales quota? Well, not if I look at it the right way. By the way, so if you're using Tableau, you can use a line chart and have it break where there's missing data. And so that may be another way to avoid a misleading visualization. But be careful with line charts that connect periods in time, even crossing over missing periods of time. Avoid misleading visualizations. But tied to that, avoid making assumptions. So I come up with this visualization and they go, oh man, we have had months where we didn't have any sales, so we have missed our quota. But it turns out, no, we're just missing records of data. So I need to avoid making assumptions about the data, about the business, about anything. I need to question everything. Is there an explanation for something that I might be missing? That if I tell a story around it and I'm wrong, I'm going to lose trust. Avoid making assumptions. And finally, avoid making analysis blunders. So I'm going to come back to this visualization where I said our discount policy needs review. Well, obviously, every time our discounts exceeded 40%, we went into negative profit territory. But are there really enough data points to draw that conclusion? Are 2 times enough to really understand if there's a correlation there, a strong correlation? I need to go back to my analysis, maybe put this in a scatter plot, maybe look at a trend line and look at p-values and apply some statistics to it to understand, am I really able to draw the conclusion that I want my audience to draw? Or am I potentially missing the fact that there could be other factors at play? Maybe there's some seasonality going on here. Maybe there were other things that impacted the profits instead of discounts, or maybe discounts played a part, but there may have been something else that played a bigger part. So avoid making analysis blunders. All right, so that concludes some of the dangers that you might face as you tell stories with your data. What I want to ask you now is, what did you just experience? Turns out you just experienced a story, because most things in life have this flow of a narrative, including webinar presentations. So we had an intro. Bridget told you about me, then I told you about me, and you probably got sick of hearing about me. And then I introduced the topic of the day. And then we had a crisis. I told you how I usually create dashboards for clients and how that's very useful, but sometimes I need to take that to the next level and actually tell a compelling story. And that was our conflict. That was our crisis. And that led us through understanding context and narrative and a call to action, and it brought us to a turning point. How we can enhance our stories to tell things in a compelling way. And that very quickly drove us to a climax of understanding the dangers of telling a powerful story if we tell it wrong. And so finally, that brings us to our conclusion.